Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mark, for a fantastic panel. You're all waiting for your daily fix of what has President Macron said about NATO today. And while we've been in this session, we've had a fascinating press conference with President Trump, President Macron, and we've heard him say, our common enemy is Islamic terrorism. Russia is not the threat it was. Times have changed. There is no Warsaw Pact. I can't wait to hear what our next panelists have to say about that, their perspective on this. The next session is going to be about NATO's front lines, from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Many of you will be familiar with the fact that, as has been mentioned this morning, NATO has battle groups in Eastern Europe for the first time in its history. What you may not know is that the Black Sea is also becoming an increasing site of competition. I was lucky enough to spend a week this summer on the Black Sea on a US destroyer and a Ukrainian frigate as they exercised for Exercise Seabreeze. And NATO ship numbers in the Black Sea have gone up year on year in the last few years as that has become more of a focus for the alliance. So from all the way in the north to the southeastern flank, we're going to have an excellent discussion now. Please welcome Bill Neely from NBC News.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. Good afternoon. Our focus in this session is on NATO's front line, from the Baltic to the Black Sea. 70 years ago, the countries you're about to hear from, of course, were part of the Soviet bloc. 4 of the 5, in fact, were part of the Soviet Union, and NATO's mission was to keep them out of the West. Well, things change. NATO's frontier has moved. Russia feels threatened, or at least it says it does, and these states are on the front line. So how safe do they feel? Does NATO do enough to reassure and to deter? And who scares them more? President Putin, President Trump, President Erdogan? Please welcome our guests for this session, beginning from Ukraine with the Foreign Minister Vadim Prystaiko. From Georgia, the Foreign Minister David Zalkalyani. From Lithuania, the Defense Minister Raimundas Karoblis. From Estonia, the Defense Minister Yuri Luik. And finally, from Romania, the Defense Minister Nicolae Ciucă. As you settle yourselves, gentlemen, I'd actually like to take a vote, just a quick poll here from the audience. Could you please raise your hands if you believe the greatest challenge to NATO in 10 years' time will be Russia? Well, that's certainly not unanimous. In fact, that's 50% or less. And just one other quick question. Is NATO right now doing enough on its eastern frontier? Please raise your hands if you think it is doing enough. Can you raise your hands if you think NATO is doing enough on its eastern border? And I think that's very, very few. Let's see if these gentlemen can convince you at all, or if things change by the end of the session. I would like to start with some brief comments from each of you. I am going to keep them brief, if possible. We'll start no particular order except from north to south. So I'm going to start with Mr. Yuri Luik from Estonia. What is the big challenge that you face, and is NATO doing enough?
Well, to be honest, the big challenge is what was pointed out here with the show of hands, which is Russia. I mean, I think Russia has shown with its actions that it is a serious security threat. And the fact that there are troops in Estonia, EFP troops, British and French at the moment, I think are a great testament that NATO is doing a lot in supporting its easternmost members. And when people speak about Russia threats, and ask whether it's high or low, I always say that this depends on what we do. If we are serious in our actions, if we are clear and concise in our messaging, then the threat is quite low. But if we are weak, if we are wobbly, then the threat can go up. I think the biggest problem at the moment is not the forward presence of NATO troops. They are there. It's a small presence, but they are there. But what we need is more exercises showing how we bring in additional troops if they are necessary, reinforcements if they are necessary. And there have been a huge amount of important exercises now. Just an exercise was finished called Tractable, which was a large British exercise. And next year we are very excited to look forward to an exercise, Defender 2020, which is a huge US exercise in Europe. So it depends on what we do. Thanks.
Mr. Karoglis from Lithuania, I was in Vilnius in 1990 when Soviet troops attacked your television station during the battle for independence. Do you still fear Russian troops? Is NATO doing enough for you?
It's doing quite a lot indeed. And well, you mentioned 1990. Of course, after that we had all in Europe, we had so rosy glasses period when we are looking very optimistically vis-à-vis Russia and thought that there are chances for Russia. But the war against Georgia in 2008, and in particular after the attempts of reset of the relations, which was unsuccessful, it was of course the aggression against Ukraine, and it's continue. So Russia unfortunately continues with this threat to our region, to both to Baltic region and then the Black Sea region. And for Lithuania, it's the only existential external threat which we have. It's without any doubts. If the country does not respect international obligations, if it does not respect sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity of countries, and also if its continue actions to disrespect and to continue with influence in its neighborhood, it means that it's a real threat. And I think from 2014 it was done quite a lot. And Yuri has mentioned already, so this EFP, NATO enhanced forward presence. We have the leaders of Germany, enhancing of the air police, adaptation of a NATO structure, so which is really also very important. The readiness initiative, of course, it's again about the conventional threat, which in our view, first of all, is Russia. What we need to have more exercises, definitely. So we're looking to, this time, US 2030 Defender exercises, but of course NATO as such is also involved here. And yes, but also other measures which we need. So air defense, which we are still lacking, more precise defense planning, and well, other similar measures. But I think Lithuania has never had such number of guarantees and allies as we have now, and this is really important.
So Russia, the only existential threat. Mr. Chuka from Georgia, arguably the Black Sea situation is more complicated, more players. We have, for example, Turkey. Do you feel that Russia is the only threat to you?
Of course. First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity to address this audience and to talk about the top foreign policy priority for Georgia, which is full integration to NATO. And Georgia is one of the most advanced aspirant country, and it's well recognized for our fact that there are all practical tools which Georgia has, the annual national program, NATO Georgia Council, as well as substantial NATO Georgia package, which is really very helpful to speed up the process of eventual goal of Georgia, which is a full membership. At the same time, in the region, in the Black Sea region, which is becoming more and more important place of attention to NATO. one of the main security challenge comes from Russia. As we speak right now, the process of occupation is going on in Georgia. It's a legal process of borderization, installation of barbed wire fences and artificial barriers across the occupation line. People are kidnapped, they are detained in illegal custody. The normal people are suffering there, and just recently the famous Georgian doctor was kidnapped and sentenced to illegal custody. Unfortunately, for the time being, he's still there, and we are trying to consolidate support of international community. But it's what we are facing there is the humanitarian disaster, and we. In response to this, we are trying to consolidate support, and we believe that the Georgia's way towards integration to Euro-Atlantic structure is not directed against a third party. It's for strengthening our defense capability, for strengthening our resilience. You have mentioned Turkey, which is important country in the Black Sea region. It's a littoral state, also a member of the NATO, and we are developing very strong strategic partnership with Turkey. So Turkey is a very strong ally to Georgia. So Turkey still continues and will continue to support Georgia's NATO aspiration and Georgia's supporting Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. So it's in our interest to stabilize the security situation in the region with taking into consideration all legitimate interests of all NATO member states and the littoral states of the Black Sea region, because without secure Black Sea, there will be no security in the Euro-Atlantic security space.
Let me bring in Ukraine, because like Georgia, you have faced Russian troops, Crimea annexed, part of your country invaded. I was in Donbass earlier this year, and it didn't seem safe to me. Do you feel safe, reassured in any way by NATO? We have President Trump playing games, it seems, with aid, military aid to your country.
I agree with you, and you know what I'd like to tell you immediately, that by the number of hands which were raised in your question, I came to two conclusions. First of all, too few Ukrainians in the room. Second of all, we are failing as Ukrainian Foreign Affairs to explain to the rest of you who are not Ukrainians what is the real threat to all of you. We have 14,000 people dead. Just because they decided to impose their political system, will wish whatever they have to. And we are casually discussing what could be the biggest threat in this region. What I see that, yes, the north of Europe, the Baltic states, Poland, now under the focus of the NATO, we can talk about more or less troops. I'm not NATO myself, I can't give you the recommendation. What I see that we are overlooking the region of Black Sea for many, many years. We believed collectively, we are not subscribing with NATO, we are not member of NATO, it's our fault, we didn't become, but we believe that this region is safe because of the presence of the NATO, because of the Turkey. Now we have to understand, all of us, what Turkey is, and here I am on the same page as NATO, because this is neighbor, this is somebody who is keeping the keys to the Black Sea, where we happen to live. So if we are losing this, concentration, because there are so many other priorities, south of Europe, other parts of the globe, we believe that we're left on our own. And that's something which we would like to avoid. And reciprocating on your quite provocative question, I have to give you another thing, which Ukrainians sometimes asking Westerners, especially the NATO, telling guys, we actually, whether you like it or not, defending your eastern flank. And sometimes we've been hearing, who asked you for? Why would you do it? We'd never ask you to defend our flank. We are quite capable in defending. So do you believe that Ukraine's sort of input is needed, or Ukraine's role is important to NATO as much as we see the NATO is important, at least in our part of the region?
And Mr. Chuka, from Romania's point of view, Black Sea as well, do you feel that the only threat to you might be Russia, or is it a resurgent Turkey, and is NATO doing enough for you? You're in, they're not in. From the inside, is NATO doing enough?
The Black Sea, it has a very geostrategical relevance, taking into account that it links Europe, Asia, and Middle East. So, taking into account that since 2008 and 2014, since Russia invaded Crimea and created in the Black Sea an outpost from where it is projecting their forces where they are interested for. I do consider that the Black Sea is having a very, very important relevance for all the NATO and European countries. And I think, back to your first question, if NATO is doing enough, I will start saying that Russia is looking to the eastern flank as a whole. What we did, we are having two different decisions. We are having EFP in the Baltic and Poland area, and we are having the TFP in the Black Sea region. I am not saying that to compete with the measures taken in the northern part of the eastern flank. What I am saying is that NATO and EU needs to have a very coherent approach to the whole flank. So what is now happening in the Black Sea, it's that we are having three main partners: Ukraine, Georgia, and Republic of Moldova. We are having three NATO riparian countries of the Black Sea: Turkey, Bulgaria, and Romania. So all our activities are planned and conducted together. And I can say that, taking into account the Romanian initiatives to set up a multinational brigade, a multinational division, now a multinational core headquarters, all of these are done on our money and with the participation of all the NATO countries, and very much looking to the partners to be part of that. So I do really believe that we need to focus on strengthening the NATO and EU presence, and also the NATO and EU cooperation in order to support the partnership countries of NATO and the EU as well.
So it would appear that President Macron doesn't agree with what the panelists have said, because in that famous interview with The Economist, he said, Russia isn't NATO's biggest threat, that's terrorism. Just anyone at all, was that a wise thing to say? Was it, as President Trump said this morning, a dangerous thing to say?
If I may, sir, sorry for
yes? Not at all.
Involving myself again. I think here in the Black Sea region, we should not forget the Balkans. And this morning somebody was asking if the Balkans, is the Balkan to be considered the soft belly of the alliance? I think if we will not take all the measures to consider the threats coming from east, the threats coming from south as well, because here we have a crossroad, this is going to become the soft belly of the alliance. So this is my personal opinion.
So on President Macron's view that terrorism is the key threat to NATO, President Trump saying this morning President Macron's comments were dangerous.
At least I would repeat what I told. For Lithuania, Russia is the only existential threat, and really that's it. And I think also for NATO, at least the eastern flank of NATO. And how it's possible to say that, well, we can't agree with this suggestion. Well, in particular, if Russia, of course, its military doctrine says that so the NATO is the adversary of Russia, and exercising and concentrating its main and most capable military forces, it's impossible to say that Russia is not posing threat. Regarding terrorism, yes, it's also another area of NATO work, but we are ready and we continue our efforts there. Our troops are in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Mali, and elsewhere. So we really need to cover all the areas where we see NATO as the defense alliance see the threats. Russia, terrorism, and of course, strategic competition with China.
Minister, was it wise of President Macron to open up yet another divide in NATO by saying this?
Well, I agree with my Lithuanian colleague. I think the key is we very much appreciate the fact that terrorism is a major threat. Looking from our point of view, it's clear that Russia is the, as my Lithuanian colleague said, existential threat, meaning that it's a nation state which, having enormous military capabilities, can exert enormous damage. So deterring Russia, the only organization which can viably do that is NATO. So if we talk about the role of NATO, then I believe that's very clear. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't fight terrorism. For instance, the biggest Estonian operation now abroad is in Mali. And it is together with the French. It's a military mission called Barkhane. So nobody should tell us that we are not investing enough to work and fight against terrorism. And as my Lithuanian colleague also said, most of our operations are actually in the south, fighting terrorism, maintaining stability. So that's what we do.
From Ukraine's point of view, you know Russia very well. I mean, is President Putin laughing as NATO celebrates its 70th anniversary when arguably there are more splits within NATO than we've seen for a very long time?
I believe that he is not laughing. He still appreciates and respects the mightness of the alliance. That's actually the only language which Putin understands. And I have to bring to your attention that sometimes we're missing. We're trying to achieve deal with him, all of us. And in reality, he understands that's only other language. And the second thing is, when you're asking about what is terrorism or Russia, I don't actually feel the difference. Terrorist by default is somebody who is exerting violence to achieve some political something. How can you tell that Russia is not doing the same? Is killing people in Ukraine, is threatening with biological and chemical weapons around Europe for what? Just to waste some of the resources of reducing chemical weapons? No. They are trying to achieve some political goals. So this is a terrorism on a very high state level.
How worried? Yeah, sorry, yes.
So I think by identifying the threats and challenges, it's not necessary to divide the alliance. The alliance should stay united, should analyze all those threats and challenges, and to find the instrumentation in order to cope with all these threats. So I've just left the military committee of NATO, and I remember that all the chiefs of defense very clear that the approach of NATO should be 360 degrees, and I do really very much believe in that.
NATO should remain united, but of course Turkey has just invaded an Arab country without consulting any NATO ally except perhaps one which green-lighted it. I know I'm being provocative here, but honestly, should Turkey be a member of NATO anymore? Do you feel that they are undermining the alliance? Anyone, sir?
Yes, of course. But first, coming back to your previous question, that about the terrorists, whether it's a threat or not, or challenge. Of course, this is a very serious threat and challenge. And what is important to underline that it's, of course, there are 29 members, there are different positions and different evaluation of the current threats and challenges, but it's really important to stay united. The united position, solidarity within NATO partners is really important. As an outsider, but not a member of the NATO, our advice and our wishful thinking for...
But I suppose that was my point, that Turkey clearly didn't feel any obligation to stay united.
Turkey is a really important player in the region. It's needless to say the important contribution Turkey is doing for the strengthening of the European security. Of course, there are different positions and different assessment of the current situation, but we have to take into consideration the very serious position of Turkey playing in the region for strengthening the security in the Black Sea and the wider Black Sea region, and also for the EU Atlantic security.
Sir, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, of course, Turkey is an important member of the alliance, and I think if people say, when people say that we should bring more issues to the NAC table and discuss them, then let's also recognize how difficult it is. I mean, for a sovereign country to come to the NAC table and put an issue to be debated by all NATO members. Very few countries actually do it. I would say European big countries don't do it, at least not very often. I mean, the United States is perhaps a very good example that it can be done. For instance, the United States brought to the table the IMF treaty and actually achieved, which is quite unique, a unanimous opinion about US leaving IMF treaty and Russia being to be blamed for the violation of the treaty. But as I see Deputy Secretary General of NATO here, as he knows well, people are not necessarily bringing all these issues to the table, and we shouldn't name only Turkey here.
And I mean, you mentioned the US there. Do you have confidence that if President Trump is re-elected, so we have another 5 years, that he will maintain his more recent stance towards NATO as opposed to his earlier stance when he said NATO was an obsolete organization? Do you have trust in President Trump in 4 or 5 years' time, sir?
The answer is yes, and it's not only about the personality of President Trump, but also about the administration in general. It's about also US traditions here. And the transatlantic link, transatlantic bond is really strong. And these questions, the first question I got when I became a minister was exactly about this, the same as you asked right now. And it's already 3.5 years ago. And what is on the ground, that during this time we have more American troops in Europe. We have on the ground more engagement with partially, quite seriously, with the US leadership. We have very important agreement on the NATO adaptation, on the enhanced forward presence in the Baltics and Poland. Now deployment of US troops in Poland, which is of critical importance for us, and also this deployment of the, for half a year at present, which we have, so the battalion of US troops in Lithuania, and the 2030 Defender exercises, which we will have among the biggest exercises in the region, so after the Cold War. So this demonstrates that full US engagement, its leadership, and we don't have any doubts that it will continue.
Minister Pryszajko, do you feel the same way? I mean, as I said earlier, Mr. Trump appears to be playing games with your military aid.
You know, I'm getting back to my favorite topic, Russia. That's more or less the same page, but from different sides. Yes, I agree completely. President Trump will get to understand NATO more and administration. It's like with the Russia. Each and every administration tried their way. Somebody was looking in trying to find Seoul. Somebody else was pushing big red button to restart the relations. And it's been part of American modern history, political history, to try to reset and relaunch relations with Russia, which was and is and will be failing each and every time, and administration will know it. Sometimes in a hard way, sometimes they will be much more flexible from the very beginning, and that's not just American, NATO itself. And in Ukraine, look at us, we are trying, my new president is trying to reach out to Putin and understand how we can get this course settled and how can we get out of the war. That's what all of us were honestly trying. And this will bring us all to, unfortunately, I'm not happy with that, to understanding that we have to reinforce alliance and to understand that, unfortunately, Russia is not with this us part.
Mr. Chuk, I know you had your hand up, and then I'd like to take a couple of questions from the audience. Sir.
Okay. Sir, I think the first we have to trust on President Trump is the American people. We trust very much because we are having a very strong strategic partnership with the United States. And as I mentioned, we are having our initiatives, and those are part of the TFP, and the very relevant presence within those initiatives are the American soldiers. So I can say that in the last period of time, United States has increased the presence. We are hosting also the American airfield and air base. So that's also very important for us. And we are very much looking forward on developing all these relationships, taking into account the challenges in the Black Sea.
To be fair to President Trump, he gets a lot of stick, but he has authorized greater defense contributions in the last few years. Lady here with her hand up, please, a question. Okay.
Hi, my name's Sadiha Chowdhury, and I'm a sixth form student hoping to study politics and social sciences next year. And my question is kind of slightly off tangent, but it's in regards to refugees, and I kind of wanted to know each of your opinions on how refugees are handled, not just in your own countries, but globally, and if you personally think that there's room for this to be improved, and if so, in what way?
So the refugee wave, which can also be a destabilizer, it can be an issue of national security, sir.
Easy with me. We have our own almost 2 million refugees because of the war, which we have to adapt within Ukraine. We're not sending another wave to Europe. We're doing it right now. So we do understand and feel the pain of the refugees. So we are understanding in solidarity with these people who are trying to find their safe havens, bringing their kids and the rest of the belongings.
Same is about Georgia. We have our own refugees, and more than 300,000, almost 400,000. It's almost 10% of Georgian population. We have our internally displaced persons, and people are really suffering. You know that what we are facing in our occupied regions is a humanitarian disaster. The population is decreasing 5-6 times, and we are dealing with the problem. We have our moral and legal obligation toward these people, you know, to alleviate suffering of those who are displaced because of occupation and criminal annexation of these territories.
I'm going to push it on because I think we can all agree that the refugee wave from Syria and elsewhere, not least in this country with Brexit, has been a destabilizer. Lady here, yes.
Thank you so much, and thank you, ministers, for engaging us in such a fascinating discussion. I'm Elena Poptodorova from the Bulgarian Atlantic Club. And yes, Minister Chuk, I was the one who raised the alarm, so to say, over the Balkans becoming the soft belly of transatlantic security if not measures are taken. Actually, I happen to be one of those who think it's about NATO doing too little too late. The Atlantic Club of Bulgaria has long argued the need, the necessity of enhanced NATO presence in the Black Sea. Experts claim that there is a disbalance of 6-to-1 superiority for Russian maritime presence in the Black Sea. So my question to you, gentlemen, would be, ministers, would be, given the restrictions of the Montreux Convention, how do you think we can go about it? Do you think NATO would be prepared for enhanced military exercises, presence, rotating presence, if you wish, in order to make sure that we can achieve the goal, being respectful at the same time of realities which we cannot change now?
I will take that one. Yeah, you're right, the Montreux Convention is limiting in some way the NATO presence in the Black Sea, but I can tell you that in the last 2-3 years, we are having a NATO presence at least for 160, even 185 days per year. But I do very much trust in all the NATO riparian countries to develop their own maritime capabilities in order to have the instrumentation to be able to respond by themselves and also to support any NATO presence in the Black Sea.
I gather, Mr. Chuka, you have to leave.
Very sorry for that.
Here's an important engagement. There was a gentleman at the back there who had his hand up. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Vaidotas Benišis. I'm a journalist from Vilnius, Lithuania. Mr. Karoblis, in his introductory remarks, said that among things that Lithuania needs is more precise defense planning. I would like to ask Lithuanian and Estonian ministers whether you believe that you would find solution with Turkey during this leaders' meeting to get approved, updated NATO defense plans for Baltics and for Poland, and why they are important for the security. Thank you.
And I would add to that, do you feel that you're being taken hostage by Turkey, that they're blackmailing NATO?
Well, I would not say that it's about blaming that. And this is one of, first of all, we have defense plans. And it's the revision of that, of course, to have more precision and similar aspects and to have the adjustment. And it's only one of the topics we have in NATO, and of course, so among others. And really, so the life is continue. And regarding the results, we'll see. So the meeting, the summit, the leaders' meeting will start now. But earlier or later, during this meeting, or later, of course, we will find the solutions. We see the progress. And it's one of the issues where, so NATO is the alliance of 29 countries. Naturally, the positions from time to time, they differ. And the beauty of the alliance is that we are finding the solutions. And I am sure that also we will find the solution earlier or later on this issue too.
Mr. Lewicz, I think the question was for you as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, the discussions are going on all the time. Obviously, there are opportunities during the summit, attempts to find a compromise. If we don't find a compromise here, we hopefully will find it a bit later. But I'm absolutely sure that we find a compromise. I have no doubt about that. But it's very important to understand that Baltic states have defense plans related to Article 5. So it's not that we are lacking defense plans as such. I'm also a bit sad that the issue of defense plans, which according to NATO's usual procedure are not to be discussed openly at all, have become a major subject of discussion all around the world. But that's how the modern world works.
Just a very brief question to Georgia and Ukraine. You were promised membership. I mean, it was more than that. You were approved, if you like, more than 10 years ago, and still you're waiting outside the door. I mean, do you feel frustrated? Are you beginning to feel that you could be betrayed by NATO? Mr. Zelkan?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The decision made during the Bucharest summit back in 2008 was more than 10 years ago, and this is the decision where clearly describes that Georgia will become the NATO member. Since then, there were a lot of summit meetings and also with the different decisions and declarations that Georgia will become a NATO member. Of course, we realize that the current situation within the NATO, that there is no political decision made yet, but we are fully using all the existing practical tools, as I have mentioned, the implementation of annual national program, as well NATO-Georgia Council, the substantial NATO-Georgia package, which is also important practical way to speed up the process of Georgia's full integration, moving Georgia closer to the eventual membership. So these are the very important instruments. At the same time, Georgia is already acting like an ally. So we are in the same line as the NATO standards, for example, on burden sharing. 2% we are spending on GDP, 20% on major military acquisition. Georgia is the biggest per capita contributor to the resolute support mission in Afghanistan. Although we have suffered casualties, 32 Georgians died in Afghanistan. For a small country like Georgia, it's quite a big loss, but we realize that this is our contribution to the global security. Of course, when this is not reciprocated, when a country like Georgia delivers, it has to be reciprocated. We need a practical political solution. But we are not discouraged by this fact. We are continuing our vigorous efforts. We are working bilaterally with all the members of the alliance, with the strategic partner, with the United States, with Turkey, with France, with Germany, to increase our defense and security capabilities in order to increase our resilience. So we are doing everything possible to prepare country for the momentum. When this momentum is, momentum to come, we have to be ready for this moment.
And very briefly, from Kiev's point of view, if you're not in NATO in 10 years' time, what would that say? What would you do?
Thanks to my Georgian friends, I had the time to, to gather all my diplomatic 20+ years to describe in diplomatic terms what happened in Bucharest. I believe is a great mistake. That we were not allowed. First of all, we were promised to be a member of NATO. Then it was an idea that membership action plan for Ukraine and Georgia is resolved, and by the end of the year, ministers of foreign affairs had to report to their respective leaders to tell how it's working. It's been more than 10 years, and we are not invited neither to MEP nor to membership. So I believe the indecisiveness of NATO at that time and since then allowed Russia first to invade Georgia and then in 6 years to come to Ukraine.
Just before we finish, just another question to the audience, because one thing we haven't talked about is China. I'm afraid that is another subject. But should NATO, just a show of hands again, in 10 years' time, should NATO's focus be as much on China and the challenge from China as it is on Russia? Raise your hands if you think China is equally important for NATO in 10 years' time. Well, that's the biggest show of hands so far, and maybe we should pause or maybe end there. Maybe we've just got time, literally 10 seconds. What would your message be to NATO? Really short, snappy. What would your message be to NATO for the next 10 years? Priorities.
China.
Change.
China.
China. Sir.
Georgia, please keep Georgia, please.
And from Lithuania's point of view.
Unfortunately, I think that Russia will continue. Still, this mid-term threat will be Russia. But China, yes, will be second, and the challenges with China will increase.
Sir, you get the last word.
NATO is a unique organization. A unique organization. No NATO country has ever been attacked by a nation state. This is my measure of real success. Let's keep NATO alive, because it is a framework. It's like a constitution of a country. I mean, there might be those politicians and these politicians, but nobody says, let's cancel the constitution because one or the other politician you don't like. NATO is the constitution of the European security. I think that's the basic message I would deliver.
So much we haven't talked about China, the cyber threat, climate change. Should NATO look east? Should it look up to space? But I think we have covered some of the present problems. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together.